Hello, everybody. So today we're going to talk about the precedents of President George Washington. So let's start with the term precedent. If we're speaking of something that is a precedent, it's something that's being done for the first time that typically is done with excellence and sets a model for future people to follow. So whatever it may be, you're the first one that accomplishes something that's pretty amazing, and you do it with such greatness, then other people will come along after you and use your success as the model for what they should do. So George Washington, at that point in history, was probably arguably the most famous man in America, and still to this day is one of the most identifiable, historical icons of our nation's history. So when he became the president, he really approached it very uniquely. He didn't go into it with from most accounts, selfish motives. He believed it was an office of service, and he wanted what was best for the country at that time. So one of the things he was very deliberate with was making some very clear-cut decisions with his actions. And the Constitution did not have any type of restrictions on how many times you could actually serve as the President of the United States. But one of the first things that Washington did after his second term in office was decide that he did not want to run for a third. He believed that 2 full terms of 8 years was enough to accomplish what needed to be accomplished by a leader in the presidency. And if you couldn't get it done then, it was time to step aside and let someone else come in and volunteer their time to try to serve. That was not a law until after Franklin Delano Roosevelt became president during the Great Depression and World War II. And ran for 4 terms. He died in his last term in office. Otherwise, he would have fulfilled 16 years as the president. After FDR, Congress passed a law which limits the presidency to 2 full terms or the lesser of 10 years if there's need for succession. So Washington set an example that people followed for well over a century. And it now is the law of the land because of what George Washington established in the very first presidency. Second thing he did was he enforced the system of checks and balances and federalism with the veto power. Now, we're going to talk more about that later in the unit. That probably doesn't make a lot of sense just yet. But when Congress makes a law, the president has the ability to veto it, which basically kills it off. And when he saw things that came through that he didn't think was in the best interest of the United States, he would use the power of veto to stop the legislation. Now, Congress has a chance to override the president's veto. That's a little bit trickier to do, but we'll talk more about that with, not so much in this unit, but you did learn about it in the last unit with the checks and balances system. So we'll see some examples of where Washington may have actually enforced that. But that's the power of the veto. Number 3, he tried to lead by rising above politics. He really didn't believe in the political type of thing that we see in the world today. He was not a politician. He led by his conscience, and he kind of felt like politics were sort of a waste of time and beneath him to get involved with. Let's do what was right. And then this kind of takes us into point 4. He would have let Congress battle things out, and he felt like his role was to only step in and bring compromise when it seemed like compromise was not really available. So he stayed out of it. He let Congress lead as the legislative branch and make the laws, and only when there was a need to bring compromise would he get involved. So 3 and 4 kind of go together a little bit. But that was his view on staying above politics and allowing Congress to handle things and then bringing compromise. A 5th precedent that he brought about was leading in foreign policy and in defense matters. He did believe, as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, the individual trusted with the powers to run the military, that it was the responsibility of the president to deal with foreign countries and to protect the United States, which means making sure that the military was structured and ready to defend. Now, this was Washington's background too, as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Forces. He led the army through the Revolutionary War and brought us to a place of victory. So this was in his area of expertise, and he modeled that with how he dealt with foreign countries and tried to lead in the best interest of the United States, both with policy and also how he structured the military. Another example that he set was traveling the country and staying in touch with the people. Just going to visit, making stops across the United States of America and communities and seeing what was happening with the American people in all areas of the country. Lastly, the last precedent that he established was deciding what his title was going to be. Remember, George Washington's the first president of the United States, so he could have picked any name that he wanted. If we go to a local district justice, a local magistrate, we're going to call them Your Honor. And it has a little bit more of a sophisticated style to the title that you have, even for a very local judge. But with the presidency, George Washington was very deliberate in not wanting anything to sound like royalty. So he took the typical title for adult male in the United States, Mr., and he coupled it with the job, President. And to this day, when you see people address the President of the United States, you will see that they always refer to him as Mr. President. When we have the first female president elected, you're going to see her noted as Madam President. So the title, again, whether it's a male or a female in office, is fairly ordinary to avoid anything that looks like royalty. These were 7 examples, 7 precedents set by George Washington. What I want you to think about now is, which of these 7 precedents do you think George Washington established, out of the ones that he established, which one do you think is the most valuable? Which ones are still valuable today, which are still happening with the presidency today? And out of the 7 examples that Washington set, which one do you think was the most valuable? Thank you.